Have you ever poured your entire soul into something, only to have it stolen in the blink of an eye? Imagine crafting a masterpiece, a reflection of your deepest passion and talent, and then being cast aside, erased from your own story by the very person who was supposed to champion you. This is a story about that kind of devastating betrayal, but it is also a story about the indomitable strength of a woman who refused to be silenced. It's about how a single, secret recording on a phone became the first tremor in an earthquake that would bring a powerful man's empire crashing to the ground. Clara Evans lived and breathed architecture. It wasn't just a profession to her, it was a language she used to speak with the world. The sweep of a line, the interplay of light and shadow, the cold, honest texture of concrete and glass, these were her vowels and consonants, her poetry. For the past 6 years, she had been a rising star at Thorne Architecture, a prestigious firm helmed by the charismatic and notoriously demanding Marcus Thorne. She had joined fresh out of graduate school, her portfolio burning with a raw, innovative talent that Marcus had been quick to recognize and, as she would later understand, to cultivate for his own benefit. She worked tirelessly, sacrificing weekends and evenings, fueled by black coffee and the intoxicating promise of one day seeing her own vision etched into the city's skyline. And now, that day felt closer than ever. For the last 18 months, Clara had been the lead designer, the creative engine, behind the firm's most ambitious project to date, the Elysian Tower. It was to be more than just another skyscraper, it was her magnum opus, a soaring testament to sustainable design and human-centric living. The tower was designed to breathe, with integrated vertical gardens, a revolutionary water reclamation system, and a unique facade that shifted with the sun to optimize energy efficiency. It was complex, it was bold, and it was hers. Every curve, every beam, every pane of glass was a product of her mind and her heart. Marcus was the face of the project, the one who charmed investors and city officials, but everyone within the firm's hallowed halls knew, the Elysian Tower was Clara's soul rendered in steel and light. But another, more personal creation was also taking shape within her. For several weeks, a quiet, joyful secret had been growing inside her, a gentle counterpoint to the relentless stress of her work. She was pregnant. The discovery had been a wave of shock followed by a tidal surge of pure, unadulterated happiness. She and her partner, Ben, had been trying for years, enduring the quiet heartbreaks of failed attempts until they had almost given up hope. Now, a new life was beginning, a future she hadn't dared to dream of was unfolding. The joy was immense, but it was tinged with a thread of anxiety, and that anxiety had a name, Marcus Thorne. Telling him was a hurdle she knew she had to clear. Marcus cultivated an environment of monastic devotion to the firm. Family, personal lives, sickness, these were seen as distractions, unfortunate liabilities. He had once offhandedly remarked at a company dinner that, commitment is a 24/7 concept, and the chill in his voice had been unmistakable. Clara knew there was no good time to announce a pregnancy, a future maternity leave, in the middle of the firm's most critical project. But she was a planner, an architect of her own life as well as of buildings. She decided to frame it as a positive, a testament to her ability to manage all facets of her life with precision and dedication. She would present him with a detailed plan for her leave, a seamless handover protocol for her team, and a timeline for her return. She would show him that her commitment was unwavering. She scheduled the meeting for a Tuesday morning. As she stood outside the frosted glass of his corner office, she smoothed down her dress over the barely there swell of her belly and took a deep, steadying breath. This was just another project parameter to manage, she told herself. A variable to be integrated into the overall design of her life. Inside, Marcus was seated behind a vast, obsidian desk that looked like a slab of a fallen asteroid. He didn't look up immediately, letting her stand there for a moment in a calculated display of power. Finally, he lifted his gaze, his eyes a pale, chilly blue. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "What can I do for you? I hope this is important. We're on a razor's edge with the Elysian permitting." "It is important, Marcus," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "And it's wonderful news. I wanted to let you know personally that my partner and I are expecting a baby." She watched his face, searching for a flicker of warmth, of humanity. She found none. The polite, professional mask didn't slip so much as it evaporated. For a fraction of a second, his eyes tightened, the chilly blue hardening into chips of ice. It was a minuscule, almost imperceptible shift, but to Clara, who spent her life studying minute details, it was as loud as a slamming door. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an unspoken hostility. He recovered in an instant, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. A slow, thin smile spread across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, drawing the word out. "That is news. Congratulations. I trust you have a plan in place to ensure the Elysian project does not suffer from any domestic complications." "Of course," Clara said quickly, relieved to be on the familiar ground of logistics. She launched into her meticulously prepared speech, outlining her transition plan, her commitment to working remotely right up until her due date, her eagerness to return. He listened in silence, his steepled fingers tapping against his lips, his gaze unnervingly blank. When she finished, he simply nodded. "Thank you for letting me know, Clara. We'll discuss this further." The dismissal was clear. The meeting was over. She left his office feeling a profound sense of unease. The conversation hadn't gone badly, not on the surface. But the coldness, the utter lack of genuine warmth, had shaken her. It felt less like she had shared happy news and more like she had confessed to a critical design flaw. The next few days were strangely quiet. The usual barrage of late-night emails from Marcus ceased. He avoided her in the hallways. When she tried to schedule a follow-up meeting about the project, his assistant informed her that he was unavailable for the rest of the week. A knot of dread began to form in her stomach. She tried to dismiss it as hormonal anxiety, but her instincts, the same ones that could spot a fatal flaw in a structural blueprint from 50 paces, were screaming that something was wrong. The summons came on Friday afternoon. An email, curt and impersonal, from Human Resources, requesting her presence in Marcus's office immediately. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. As she walked the long corridor, the familiar, sterile scent of the office, of clean carpets and printer ink, suddenly smelled clinical, hostile. This time, a severe-looking woman from HR, someone Clara had never met before, was already seated beside Marcus's desk. A strange, primal instinct took over. Clara's hand slipped into her purse, her fingers finding her phone. She often used the voice memo app to record her own verbal notes during site visits or complex design sessions. It was second nature. With a discreet tap of her thumb, she activated it. The small, red recording icon glowed silently from within the dark confines of her bag. "Clara, thank you for coming," Marcus began, his tone dripping with a false, pitying solemnity. "Please, have a seat." She remained standing. "What is this about, Marcus?" He exchanged a look with the HR woman, a small, shared sigh of theatrical regret. "Clara," he said, "this is extremely difficult. We've been reviewing your performance on the Elysian project, and frankly, it's not just been subpar, it's become a significant liability. Deadlines have been missed, your latest material specs were wildly over budget, and your focus, well, it's clearly not where it needs to be." The words hit her like physical blows. She felt the air leave her lungs. "What are you talking about? That's not true. I've met every deadline. The specs were approved by you. My focus has never been stronger." "I understand this is difficult to hear," the HR woman cut in, her voice a monotone drone. "But the firm has to protect the integrity of its projects. We've made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Termination. The word was an obscenity. It echoed in the silent, air-conditioned room. Her career, her masterpiece project, her livelihood, her health insurance, all of it, gone, in a single, brutal sentence. The carefully constructed architecture of her life was being demolished around her. "You're firing me," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You're firing me because I told you I was pregnant." Marcus laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Don't be hysterical, Clara. This is a performance issue, and we have a thick file of documentation to prove it. Your condition is irrelevant. In fact, we're doing you a favor. Now you'll have plenty of time to, as you said, focus on your domestic complications. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The fabricated file, the condescending tone, the twisting of her own words against her. He was not just firing her, he was trying to break her. He stood up, a clear signal that her presence was no longer required. Our head of security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings and then escort you from the premises. Please be quick about it. Numb, she allowed herself to be led away. Her mind was a maelstrom of shock and white-hot fury. At her desk, the large, stern-faced security guard watched her like a hawk as she numbly packed a small cardboard box. Her notebooks, her favorite pens, a framed photo of her and Ben. She couldn't even access her computer, her password had already been deactivated. Her digital life's work, thousands of hours of design and innovation, was locked away from her forever. As the guard led her toward the elevator, past the shocked and averted eyes of her colleagues, she felt a profound sense of violation, as if she'd been scoured from her own life. That night, she sat in the dark of her living room, the small box of her professional life on the floor beside her. The eviction notice from 2 months prior, a relic of a time before she landed the big project, was still tucked in a drawer, a terrifying reminder of how close to the edge she had always been. Now, with a baby on the way, the loss of her salary and insurance wasn't just a setback, it was a catastrophe. Ben held her, his own face pale with shock and anger, but she felt a million miles away. Then she remembered. The phone. The recording. With trembling hands, she pulled it from her purse and navigated to the voice memo app. There it was, a file, time-stamped to her meeting. She pressed play. The cold, corporate voices filled the silent apartment. Marcus's lies about her performance, the HR woman's droning script, her own shocked, disbelieving responses. And then, the most damning part, Marcus's mocking, dismissive laugh and his cruel words, "Now you'll have plenty of time to focus on your domestic complications." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a legal smoking gun, not on its own. But it was the truth. It was the sound of his malice, his intent, captured and preserved. It was a tiny shard of evidence in the wreckage of her career. And in the crushing darkness of her despair, it felt like the first, faint glimmer of a light. It was all she had. And she knew, with a certainty that cut through the fog of her grief, that it had to be enough. This was not just an ending. It was the beginning of a war. The weeks that followed were a descent into a bleak, suffocating fog. The initial shock curdled into a persistent, low-grade terror. Clara, a woman who had orchestrated the complex dance of contractors, engineers, and city planners, now found herself struggling to manage the simple arithmetic of survival. Her severance package was insultingly small, a pittance designed to buy her silence, and it was disappearing at an alarming rate. The rent on her small apartment, once manageable, now loomed like a guillotine. The mounting pile of medical bills for prenatal checkups became a monument to her precarious situation. She tried to find new work, sending out dozens of applications to other architectural firms. The responses were a symphony of polite rejections. A few interviews were granted, but they always ended the same way. The interviewers would be impressed by her portfolio, the parts she had managed to save on a personal drive, but then would come the veiled questions, the sudden shift in atmosphere. She could feel Marcus's influence like a poison in the well. He was a giant in their small, insular industry, and a word from him was enough to brand her as difficult, unreliable, or worse. Her pregnancy, now becoming more apparent, was another unspoken barrier. She saw the glances at her belly, the calculations being made behind professional smiles. She was no longer Clara Evans, brilliant designer. She was a liability. The city skyline, once a source of inspiration, now felt like a personal affront. Every towering structure was a reminder of the world she had been exiled from. Some nights, she would stand at her window, looking out at the glittering lights, and feel a sense of despair so profound it was physical, a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Ben was her rock, working extra shifts at the restaurant where he was a chef, his hands, usually so skilled with a knife, now rough and chapped from washing endless dishes. But she could see the strain in his eyes, the worry he tried so hard to hide. She felt like a burden, a failure, a ship taking on water and threatening to pull him down with her. This was her nadir, the lowest point she had ever reached. She was isolated, unemployed, and facing the terrifying prospect of bringing a child into a world where she couldn't even afford to keep a roof over their heads. It was during one of these dark nights, scrolling aimlessly through legal aid websites, that she decided she couldn't surrender. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the fear, finally boiled over. Marcus had taken her job, he had taken her project, but she would not let him take her fight. The memory of his smug, cruel face in that final meeting was a spur, a catalyst. She took what was left of her severance, a sum she knew should be saved for diapers and rent, and made a decision. It was a gamble, perhaps a foolish one, but it was an act of defiance. She was going to hire a lawyer. Her search led her to a name that stood out from the sea of corporate law firms, Eleanor Vance. Her website was simple, no frills, her biography direct. She specialized in employment law, specifically wrongful termination and discrimination cases. She had a reputation for being a shark, a tenacious fighter who took on cases others deemed unwinnable. There was a photo of her, a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that tolerated no nonsense. Clara felt a flicker of kinship, of hope. She sent a desperate, late-night email, outlining her situation in stark, honest terms. To her surprise, a reply came the next morning. "Come in today. 2 p.m. Bring everything you have." Eleanor Vance's office was in an older, less glamorous building, but it hummed with a quiet intensity. The walls were lined not with awards, but with bookshelves overflowing with legal texts and case files. Eleanor herself was exactly as she appeared in her photo, sharp, direct, and radiating a formidable intelligence. She listened to Clara's story without interruption, her gaze fixed on Clara's face, her expression unreadable. Clara's voice wavered at times, thick with the emotion of reliving the betrayal, but she pushed through, laying out the facts as precisely as an architectural drawing. Finally, she slid her phone across the polished wood of the desk. "This is what I have," she said. "It's not much, but it's the truth." Eleanor picked up the phone, attached a set of headphones, and pressed play. As the recording of that final, brutal meeting filled her ears, Clara watched her face. For the first time, she saw a crack in the lawyer's stoic facade. A muscle in Eleanor's jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. When the recording finished, she set the phone down gently and looked at Clara, really looked at her, for a long moment. "It's more than you think," Eleanor said, her voice a low, steady hum. The tone, the condescension, his choice of words. "Domestic complications. A good litigator can build a house with bricks like that." She paused, leaning forward. "But let me be clear, Miss Evans. Marcus Thorne is a Goliath. He will come at you with a phalanx of expensive lawyers from a top-tier firm. They will try to bury us in motions, depositions, and paperwork. They will try to bleed you dry, emotionally and financially. They will try to paint you as an incompetent, hysterical, disgruntled employee. This will be the fight of your life. Are you ready for that?" Clara met her gaze, the despair of the past weeks crystallizing into a hard, cold resolve. "He took my future. He tried to erase me. What else do I have to lose?" A slow, appreciative smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Good," she said. "Because I don't like bullies. And I especially don't like men like Marcus Thorne. I'll take your case on contingency. My fee comes from what we win, not what you have. But I need more from you than just this recording. We need to prove not just that he fired you illegally, but what he stood to gain. We need to establish the true value of what he stole from you. We need to prove that the Elysian Tower was your creation." That night, for the first time in weeks, Clara felt a shift in the atmosphere of her own mind. The suffocating fog of despair was beginning to recede, replaced by the clear, sharp air of purpose. Eleanor's words had given her a new blueprint, a new project. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a client. A plaintiff. She was building a case. She unearthed the few personal items she had managed to salvage from her office, 3 Moleskine notebooks filled with her distinctive, spidery handwriting and frantic, brilliant sketches, a personal hard drive she used for early-stage conceptual work. She spread the notebooks across her dining table, the pages crackling as she opened them. It was like unearthing a lost civilization, her civilization. There, in graphite and ink, was the DNA of the Elysian Tower. Early concepts for the kinetic facade, mathematical calculations for the gray water recycling system, philosophical musings on the relationship between public space and private dwelling. Driven by a new, fierce energy, she spent the next few days cross-referencing her original designs with the sparse details and promotional renderings Thorn Architecture had released since her departure. At first glance, the tower in the renderings looked like hers. The silhouette was the same, the grand, sweeping gesture against the sky was hers. But as she looked closer, she started to see the changes, the subtle, insidious corruptions of her vision. Marcus was keeping the aesthetic shell, the beautiful, marketable skin of the building, but he was gutting the soul. Her complex, state-of-the-art sustainable systems had been simplified, replaced with cheaper, off-the-shelf solutions. The integrated vertical gardens were reduced to cosmetic green walls. He was turning her living, breathing organism into a hollow monument to his own ego, all while preparing to take the credit for its beauty. The discovery didn't dishearten her, it enraged her. It was evidence. It was motive. Just as she was documenting these discrepancies for Eleanor, an email arrived in her inbox. The subject line was blank. The sender was an encrypted, anonymous address. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The message was short, just 2 sentences. I know what he did to you was wrong. He's submitting the Elysian for the Pinnacle Award under his name. Check the archive_m directory on the main server. The email was signed, simply, L. Clara stared at the screen, her mind racing. L, it had to be Leo. Leo Martinez, a junior architect, young, whip-smart, and one of the few people at the firm who had treated her with genuine kindness and admiration. She remembered him lingering by her desk, asking insightful questions about her design process, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and ambition. He had seen the truth. The Pinnacle Award. It was the most prestigious prize in their field, the equivalent of an Oscar for architecture. Winning it would cement Marcus's legacy, making him untouchable. And he was planning to do it with her work. The mention of a hidden server directory, however, was the real bombshell. It suggested a repository, a place where Marcus might keep his secrets. This was the lifeline she and Eleanor had been hoping for, a thread that could lead them into the very heart of Marcus's deceit. With trembling fingers, she forwarded the email to Eleanor with a single line, I think we just found our way in. A new alliance had just been forged in the shadows, and Clara felt the ground beneath her feet, so treacherous for so long, finally begin to feel solid again. The war was escalating, and for the first time, she had an army. The secret, late-night meeting with Leo Martinez felt like something out of a spy novel. They met in a dimly lit, all-night diner halfway across town, a place of cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of stale coffee. Leo was visibly terrified. He kept glancing at the door, his hands trembling as he clutched a lukewarm mug. He was risking his entire career, his entire future, and he knew it. I shouldn't be here, he whispered, his eyes wide and haunted. If he finds out. Leo, I will never forget this, Clara said, her voice low and sincere. Why are you doing this? He looked down at his hands. Because I came to Thorn Architecture to learn from people like you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I saw what you were creating with the Elysian. It was important. It was art. And I watched him take it from you. I watched him stand up in a staff meeting last week and present your concepts, your words, as his own. He calls it Thorne's Law of Organic Integration. I felt sick. Everyone knows it's your work, but they're all too scared to say anything. I can't be one of them. His words were a balm to her wounded spirit, a confirmation that she wasn't crazy, that her legacy hadn't been completely erased. He went on to describe the hidden server directory, archive_m. It was Marcus's digital treasure chest, a place where he hoarded concepts and ideas, many of them harvested from former employees. It was a digital graveyard of stolen dreams. Leo, being a junior member of the IT support team on weekends, had stumbled upon it by accident. He couldn't risk accessing it directly again, the logs were too closely monitored, but he had something just as valuable. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a hand-drawn map of the firm's network architecture, complete with server names, IP addresses, and notes on security protocols. "I don't know if it's enough," Leo said, his voice barely audible. "But it's a start." "Leo," Clara said, looking at the intricate diagram. "This is more than a start. This is a key." The next day, in Eleanor Vance's office, the three of them, Clara the architect, Eleanor the strategist, and, in absentia, Leo the inside-man, formed a council of war. Eleanor had brought in a fourth member, a freelance digital forensics expert named Kale, a lanky, caffeine-fueled wizard who spoke in a rapid-fire dialect of code and acronyms. Accessing a secure corporate server remotely without authorization is tricky, Kale said, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he studied the network map. But not impossible. This archive_M is on a physically separate drive but networked for his personal access. He's arrogant. He feels secure behind the main corporate firewall. That's his mistake. He's built a fortress with a backdoor for the king, and Leo just gave us the floor plan. While Kale began to probe the digital defenses of Thorn architecture, Eleanor launched the first official salvo. She filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, a carefully worded document that was less a demand for money and more a declaration of intent. It was designed to put Marcus on notice, to rattle his cage. The response, as predicted, was swift and brutal. A team of lawyers from a monolithic downtown firm sent back a letter dripping with condescension, dismissing Clara's claims as the fanciful grievances of a disgruntled former employee, and threatening a countersuit for defamation. They were trying to intimidate her, to bury her in legal jargon and financial threats. But their tactics had the opposite effect. Reading the letter, Clara felt a surge of cold fury. They were trying to reduce her life's work to a fanciful grievance, they were trying to bury her, but she was no longer buried. She was digging. The legal battle was a slow, grinding war of attrition, but Clara refused to be consumed by it. She knew she needed to reclaim her own identity, not just as a plaintiff, but as a creator. The weight of her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a constant, comforting reminder of the new life she was fighting for. To keep her mind sharp and her spirit alive, she began taking on small, freelance design projects. She designed a kitchen renovation for a neighbor, a backyard studio for a friend. These were minor jobs, a world away from the soaring ambition of the Elysian Tower, but they were hers. They were lifelines to her craft. Her most meaningful project was for a local nonprofit that was building a community garden in a low-income neighborhood. They had a tiny budget and a big dream. They needed a small shelter, a place for gardeners to rest and for children to learn. Clara poured her heart into it, designing a beautiful, simple structure made from reclaimed wood and recycled materials, with a green roof that could be planted by the local kids. She did it pro bono, finding a deep sense of satisfaction in creating something for a community, not for a corporation. A local news blog did a small feature on the project, publishing a photo of a visibly pregnant Clara, smiling, surrounded by volunteers. The article praised her human-scale design and community-focused ethos. It was a small victory, but it was a public record of her talent and her name, a single candle lit against the darkness of Marcus's campaign to erase her. Weeks turned into a month, and then 2. The legal discovery process was a slog, with Marcus's lawyers stonewalling at every turn. Then, one evening, Clara received an urgent call from Eleanor. "We're in." Eleanor's voice was tense with excitement. Kale did it. He found a vulnerability in the remote access protocol Marcus uses from his home office. He piggybacked on his login signature. He's in archive_M right now. Clara raced to Eleanor's office. Kale was hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the green text scrolling rapidly down the screen. "It's a goldmine," he breathed, not taking his eyes off the monitor. "He's got everything here." It's organized by employee name. He typed a command, and a new directory appeared on the screen. It read, Evans_Clara. Cale clicked it open. It was like looking at a shadow copy of her own mind. Folder after folder contained her work. Early sketches, detailed renderings, project proposals, even snippets of email correspondence where she had brainstormed ideas. It was a systematic, meticulous catalog of her intellectual property over 6 years. But it was the other folders that truly took their breath away. There were archives for at least a dozen other former employees, many of whom Clara remembered as brilliant designers who had left the firm abruptly under mysterious circumstances. It was a pattern, a modus operandi. Marcus would hire bright, young talent, drain them of their best ideas, and then discard them. But the true smoking gun lay in a subfolder titled Elysian_finance_mod. Inside were spreadsheets and internal memos that detailed Marcus's plan to systematically replace Clara's specified materials. Her high-grade, sustainable steel was swapped for a cheaper, standard-grade alloy. Her advanced, triple-paned smart glass was replaced with a less effective, and less expensive, alternative. The documents showed 2 sets of books, the official budget he showed the clients and investors, and the real budget, with the cost cuttings. He wasn't just stealing her design, he was committing fraud and potentially compromising the structural integrity and safety of the building, all to skim millions off the top of the project's budget. Clara stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over her. This was no longer just about her career or her reputation. Marcus's greed had turned her beautiful, life-affirming creation into a potential danger. The Elysian Tower, her dream, was being corrupted into a lie from its very foundations. Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. He just handed us the gun, the bullets, and a signed confession, she said, her voice grimly triumphant. He thinks he's building a monument to himself. He has no idea he's been building his own prison. The discovery of Marcus's secret archive transformed the nature of their fight. What had started as a wrongful termination suit had now metastasized into something far more serious, with potential criminal implications of fraud and endangerment. The evidence was explosive, and Eleanor began the meticulous process of documenting every file, every spreadsheet, every damning email, preparing for a battle that would be fought not just in civil court, but in the court of public opinion. Marcus Thorne, ensconced in his corner office, felt the ground begin to shift beneath him. The lawsuit, which he had initially dismissed as a gnat-like annoyance, was becoming a persistent, stinging wasp. Eleanor Vance was proving to be far more tenacious than he had anticipated, her legal filings sharp, precise, and increasingly difficult for his expensive legal team to swat away. Then he saw the local news blog article about Clara's community garden shelter. The photo of her, serene and pregnant and creating, gnawed at him. It was a narrative he couldn't control, a small, stubborn light he hadn't managed to extinguish. He began to feel the first prickles of genuine alarm. His first move was an attempt to buy his way out of the problem. His lawyers extended a settlement offer to Eleanor. It was a significant step up from the initial severance, a low 6-figure sum, but it came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement that would gag Clara for life, forbidding her from ever speaking about her time at the firm or her work on the Elysian Tower. Clara, Eleanor, and Cale reviewed the offer in Eleanor's office. Cale let out a low whistle. "That's life-changing money for most people," he commented. Clara looked at Eleanor, whose expression was unreadable. The money was tempting. It would solve all her immediate problems. It would mean a secure home for her baby, an end to the sleepless nights and the gnawing anxiety. But it would also mean letting Marcus win. It would mean his name would be on the Pinnacle Award, his lies cemented into history. It would mean the truth about the compromised materials in her tower would remain buried, a secret ticking time bomb in the heart of the city. "No," Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. "My name is not for sale. My work is not for sale." Eleanor broke into a wide, predatory grin. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said, picking up the phone to call Marcus's lawyers. "Tell your client his offer is rejected. We'll see him in court." The rejection of the settlement clearly rattled Marcus. His tactics shifted from financial inducement to character assassination. Whispers began to circulate through the architectural community. Rumors that Clara had been erratic, emotionally unstable. That she had been caught trying to steal proprietary data from the firm, a classic preemptive strike, attempting to frame her for the very thing they were about to be accused of. Friends in the industry would call Clara, their voices hesitant, asking if the rumors were true. Each call was a small cut, a fresh wound to her already battered reputation. "He's trying to discredit our star witness before she ever takes the stand," Eleanor explained grimly. "It's a scorched earth strategy. He wants you to be so thoroughly demonized that no one will believe you when the truth comes out." But the real escalation came a few nights later. Clara was asleep on the couch, having finally drifted off after hours of reviewing case documents. She was woken by a sound from the bedroom, the distinct, sharp splintering of wood. Her heart leaped into her throat. Ben was working a late shift. She was alone. Frozen with terror, she heard footsteps, slow and heavy, moving through her small apartment. They weren't frantic, they were methodical. Searching. She held her breath, trying to make herself smaller, to disappear into the shadows of the living room. Her mind raced. The hard drives. The notebooks. All her evidence was stored in a fireproof safe in her closet. The footsteps moved closer to the living room, paused, and then retreated. She heard the front door click softly shut. For a long time, she didn't move, her body rigid with fear. When she finally crept into the bedroom, she saw the door frame shattered where the lock had been forced. The room was tossed, drawers pulled open, but nothing seemed to be missing. Her jewelry box was untouched, the small amount of cash she kept in a drawer was still there. They hadn't been looking for valuables. They had been looking for her evidence. The break-in was a clear, unambiguous message: "We can get to you." The fear was cold and real, but beneath it, something else was kindled, a pure, incandescent rage. Marcus had crossed a line. He had invaded her home, the sanctuary where she was supposed to feel safe, where she was nurturing her unborn child. He had brought his war to her doorstep. The incident also sent a shockwave through their small team. Leo, who had been feeding them occasional updates from inside the firm, went silent. Clara's worried texts went unanswered. Finally, he called her from a burner phone, his voice strained and panicked. "He knows," Leo stammered. "He doesn't know what I did, not specifically, but he knows there's a leak. He called me into his office today. It was just him. He talked about loyalty, about how promising my career was. Then he said he knew I was friends with you, and that my association with a discredited former employee could be career suicide. He said he was watching me." Clara, it wasn't a warning. It was a threat. A direct threat. "Leo, you have to be careful," Clara urged, her own fear momentarily forgotten in her concern for him. "You've done more than enough. You need to protect yourself." "No," Leo said, his voice gaining a sliver of defiance. "I'm not backing down now. What he did to you, what he's doing to the tower, it's wrong. But I have to go dark. No more contact until it's over. Just win, Clara." For all of us, the line went dead. Clara stood in the quiet of Eleanor's office, recounting the break-in and Leo's call. Cale had already confirmed her apartment building's security cameras had been mysteriously disabled for a 2-hour window. There was no direct proof linking it to Marcus, but they all knew who was responsible. Eleanor's face was a thundercloud. "He's overplaying his hand," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He's getting desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. The Pinnacle Award ceremony is in 1 week. He thinks it's going to be his coronation. He has no idea it's going to be his execution." Eleanor's plan began to take shape, a brilliant piece of legal and theatrical strategy. The award ceremony was the perfect stage. It was public, it was prestigious, and Marcus would be at his most arrogant, his guard completely down. The final piece of their puzzle fell into place when Eleanor got a call back from a source she had cultivated for years, a highly respected investigative journalist named David Chen, a man who had brought down 2 corrupt city council members and a fraudulent CEO with his meticulously researched articles. Eleanor had given him a carefully curated, anonymous tip, just enough to whet his appetite. Now, she laid out the whole story for him, backing it up with the contents of Cale's decrypted files. The evidence of design theft, the financial fraud, the material substitutions that bordered on criminal negligence. Chen was hooked. His journalistic instincts smelled the biggest story of his career. He's giving a keynote speech about the Elysian Tower, Eleanor told him. He'll be on stage, in the spotlight, basking in the adoration of his peers. That's when we make our move. The plan was multi-pronged. First, Chen would be in the audience, credentialed as press, ready to ask a question that would light the fuse. Second, Eleanor had hired a process server, a man with nerves of steel, who would be waiting for a signal. He would serve Marcus with the updated lawsuit, now including charges of racketeering, fraud, and endangerment, right on the stage. Finally, Cale had a plan that was both audacious and brilliant. He had spent days studying the AV company contracted for the event. He had found a back door into their presentation software. When Marcus is at the height of his speech, Cale explained, a manic gleam in his eye, when the big, beautiful animation of his tower is playing on the screen behind him, I can take it over. We can show them the truth. Clara's heart pounded. It was perfect. It was terrifying. She would be there, in the audience, watching the men who had tried to destroy her face his public reckoning. The final days were a blur of preparation. Clara, her belly now a proud, firm globe, worked with Cale, selecting the most damning visual evidence, her original, dated sketches side by side with Marcus's final designs, screenshots of the file structures in his secret archive, the damning financial spreadsheets with the material substitutions highlighted in stark red. She felt like an architect again, but this time, she wasn't designing a building. She was designing a downfall. The night of the Pinnacle Awards arrived, a cold, clear evening. The grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was a glittering sea of black ties and evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of powerful people. Clara, dressed in a simple, elegant dark blue dress that didn't hide her pregnancy but celebrated it, sat at a small table near the back with Eleanor. She felt strangely calm, the eye of her own personal hurricane. She was no longer a victim cowering in the shadows. She was a warrior, waiting for the signal to attack. After a series of lesser awards and bland speeches, the main event began. The president of the Architectural Guild stood at the podium, lavishing praise on Marcus Thorne, calling him a visionary, a titan of the industry. Marcus walked to the stage to a thunderous ovation. He stood in the warm glow of the spotlight, his face alight with triumph. He looked out over the adoring crowd, his gaze sweeping past Clara without a flicker of recognition. To him, she was a ghost, a problem he had already solved. He began his keynote speech, his voice smooth and confident. He spoke of his design philosophy, of the importance of integrity and vision. He used phrases and concepts Clara recognized with a jolt. They were lifted, verbatim, from her own project manifestos, from conversations they had had years ago. He was wearing her intellect like a stolen coat. The Elysian Tower, he declared, his voice swelling with theatrical passion, is more than a building. It is a statement. A statement about the future we can build when one has the courage to pursue a singular, uncompromising vision. Behind him, on a massive screen, a stunning, computer-generated animation of the tower began to play. It soared into the sky, glinting in the virtual sunlight. It was her dream, polished and presented by her thief. The audience was captivated. This was the moment. From the side aisle, a hand shot up. It was the journalist, David Chen. "Mr. Thorne," he called out, his voice cutting through the reverent silence. David Chen, with the City Chronicle. An impressive vision. But can you respond to allegations from multiple sources that the core design concepts for the Elysian Tower were, in fact, created by a former employee, Clara Evans, whom you fired shortly after she informed you she was pregnant? A shocked gasp rippled through the ballroom. Marcus froze, the confident smile faltering on his lips. He blinked, momentarily blinded by the spotlight. "That is an absurd and baseless accusation," he stammered, attempting a dismissive laugh that came out as a strangled bark. Miss Evans was a junior designer who was let go for performance issues. This is clearly a pathetic attempt at revenge. Eleanor, from her table, gave a subtle nod. The process server, a grim-faced man in a cheap suit, began to walk calmly but purposefully toward the stage. But Marcus wasn't done. He tried to regain control, turning back to the audience. "The integrity of my firm is beyond reproach," he boomed. "Is it?" Chen's voice was like a surgeon's scalpel. "Then can you explain the archive_m directory on your private server, containing years of Miss Evans' work? Or the internal financial documents showing a multi-million-dollar discrepancy between the materials budgeted for the tower and the cheaper, substandard materials you actually purchased?" Marcus's face went white. The name of the archive directory, that was a detail only an insider could know. His eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal searching for an escape. The process server had reached the steps of the stage. And then, Cale made his move. The beautiful, soaring animation of the Elysian Tower behind Marcus flickered and died. For a second, the screen was black. Then, it lit up again, but with a new image. It was a split-screen view. On the left, a high-resolution scan of one of Clara's original, hand-drawn sketches of the kinetic facade, dated and signed. On the right, Marcus's final rendering of the exact same feature. The designs were virtually identical. The room erupted in a roar of murmurs. The image changed. A new split screen, Clara's detailed specs for the sustainable water reclamation system, and beside it, the cheaper, less effective system from Marcus's secret budget. Then another slide, a screenshot of the damning file directory, the folder Evans_Clara highlighted in a vicious red box. The final image was the most devastating, the two spreadsheets, side by side. Client budget versus actual spend, the numbers told a simple, damning story of fraud. Marcus Thorne stood frozen on the stage, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. The architecture of his lies had been demolished in a matter of seconds, in front of everyone who mattered in his world. His partners and investors in the front row were staring at him, their faces pale with shock and fury. The applause had been replaced by a rising tide of whispers, of condemnation. The process server stepped onto the stage, extended his hand, and placed the thick legal document into Marcus's trembling one. "Marcus Thorne," the man said, his voice devoid of emotion but carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "You've been served." Marcus looked down at the papers, then back up at the sea of faces staring at him, his empire of lies crumbling around him in the glare of the spotlight he had so desperately craved. He was exposed. He was ruined. And in the back of the room, Clara Evans placed a protective hand on her belly, the future she had fought so hard for, and watched as justice was finally, irrevocably, served. The fallout from the Pinnacle Awards ceremony was not a quiet implosion, it was a detonation that sent shockwaves through the entire city. David Chen's article, published the very next morning, was a journalistic masterpiece of destruction. It laid out every sordid detail with chilling precision: the intellectual property theft, the fraudulent billing, the reckless endangerment of substituting inferior materials. It was accompanied by the very same side-by-side images that had stunned the ballroom into silence. The story went viral, picked up by national news outlets and industry publications worldwide. Marcus Thorne's name, once a symbol of architectural prestige, became synonymous with disgrace. The consequences were swift and merciless. The Architectural Guild immediately rescinded the Pinnacle Award, issuing a public statement condemning Marcus's profound ethical breaches. The city's district attorney, spurred by the public outcry and the mountain of evidence Eleanor handed over, launched a full-scale criminal investigation. Marcus was arrested within the week, photographed in a tailored suit and handcuffs, a stark image of a spectacular fall from grace. Thorne architecture collapsed like one of its own badly designed buildings. Investors pulled out, clients canceled contracts, and a flood of lawsuits from other betrayed ex-employees, emboldened by Clara's victory, became the final nails in the firm's coffin. For Clara, the public vindication was overwhelming, a cleansing fire that burned away months of shame and fear. Her name was on everyone's lips, but this time, it was spoken with admiration and respect. She was no longer the disgruntled employee, she was the brilliant designer who had been wronged, the courageous whistleblower who had exposed a powerful man's corruption. The developers of the Elysian Tower, facing a public relations nightmare and a half-built structure now tainted by scandal, acted decisively. They publicly fired Thorn Architecture and, in a move that stunned the industry, formally approached Clara. The meeting took place in the developer's boardroom, the same kind of intimidating space where she had once been so cruelly dismissed. But this time, she was not there as an employee. She was there as the creator, the indispensable visionary they needed to salvage their flagship project. They offered her the contract to take over the Elysian Tower, to see it through to completion. Not just as a consultant, but as the lead architect, with full creative control. Clara accepted, but on her own non-negotiable terms. She demanded that the project be paused until a full structural audit could be completed. She insisted that they commit to her original, sustainable material specifications, regardless of the extra cost. She stipulated that a portion of the tower's commercial space be permanently leased at a subsidized rate to nonprofit community organizations. They agreed to everything. She had not just reclaimed her project, she had imbued it with the very integrity Marcus had tried to strip from it. 2 months later, amidst the whirlwind of legal proceedings and project planning, Clara gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl, whom she named Maya. Holding her daughter for the first time, Clara felt a sense of peace so profound it seemed to settle in her very bones. The fight had been for this moment, for this tiny, perfect life, for the right to build a future for her on a foundation of truth and strength. With the substantial settlement from the now bankrupt estate of Thorn Architecture and the advance from the Elysian contract, Clara had the capital to realize a new dream. She founded her own firm. She didn't name it after herself, but after a principle. She called it Ethel Architecture, Ethel being an Old English word for nobility, integrity, and honor. Her first hire was Leo Martinez, who had emerged from the shadows a hero. She made him a junior partner, valuing his loyalty and courage as much as his design skills. Their new office was bright, open, and collaborative, the antithesis of the cold, hierarchical world of Thorn Architecture. It was a place where creativity was nurtured, not harvested, and where family was celebrated, not seen as a liability. The final scene of this chapter of her life took place 3 years later. The Elysian Tower was complete, a breathtaking addition to the city skyline. It was even more beautiful than Clara had imagined, a slender, elegant structure that seemed to shimmer with life. Its vertical gardens cascaded down its sides, a living tapestry of green, and its innovative facade caught the afternoon sun, casting a warm, golden light on the park below. It was a symbol not of one man's ego, but of resilience and renewal. It had won a dozen awards, all of them bearing the name of Ethel Architecture and its lead designer, Clara Evans. Clara stood on the observation deck, high above the city. The wind whipped gently through her hair as she looked out at the sprawling metropolis she had helped to shape. Beside her, holding her hand, was her daughter, Maya, a bright-eyed toddler chattering excitedly about the big windows. Ben stood behind them, his arms wrapped around them both in a warm embrace. She looked down at the city, a complex, beautiful design of concrete, steel, and human dreams. She had once felt exiled from it, a ghost haunting its edges. Now, she was at its very heart. She had faced the deepest betrayal and the darkest despair, and she had not only survived, she had triumphed. She had lost everything, only to rebuild it all, stronger and more beautiful than before. She had proven that a single voice, armed with the truth, could indeed cause an earthquake, and that from the rubble of a demolished past, you could build a magnificent, soaring future.